Have a seat in the courtroom, please. If you face the person, be sworn.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony given in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
That's right.
Sir, please introduce yourself and spell your name.
My name is Jason Newlin, Jasonnewlin.
How are you employed?
I'm an investigator at the State Attorney's Office.
How long have you been with the State Attorney's Office?
A little over 7 years.
How were you employed prior to that?
I've been law enforcement since 2003.
And do you know Dale Folsom, the witness we just heard from?
I do.
All right. And how did you come to meet Mr. Folsom?
I was contacted by his mother, advised that he needed to be interviewed at the Leon County Jail, reference to this case.
All right. In reference to State of Florida versus Adam Frasch?
That's correct.
And you met with Mr. Folsom out at the jail?
I did.
Okay. And were any other deputies there when you met with him?
The first time, no. The second time, Detective Joel Weaver with the Sheriff's Office was with me.
And he told you about the statements that Mr. Frasch made to him in reference to this case?
That's correct.
And as a result of that interview, you learned that there may be an item of interest at the Frasch residence, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. We learned that golf clubs may be of interest at the Frasch residence.
Okay, and did you or your team formulate a plan to try to get these golf clubs?
Yes, we did. After the conversations that occurred between Mr. Frasch and Folsom in Leon County Jail, the plan was to allow Mr. Folsom out on pretrial with a GPS monitor, and the intent, Mr. Frasch was supposed to call him when he got out. That did not occur due to some other situations with Mr. Frasch.
So the intent was to let Folsom out and record the phone call where Frasch is telling Folsom what to do with the golf clubs?
Correct. All calls coming from the jail are recorded, so it was going to be an easy process of just monitoring Frasch's phone calls as well as Mr. Folsom's phone number specifically. And the intent was to wait for this phone call to occur. After a day or two that it didn't occur, we had to take the next step.
All right, but before we get to the next step, why didn't it occur?
Mr. Frasch got sick and was in medical. Could not
You
make
can't
phone
make
calls.
phone calls in medical?
He did not make any while in medical.
Can you make phone calls in medical?
You can at certain times, you can, but he had not made any, and there was none to Folsom's phone as well.
Okay. All right, so based on that phone call not occurring, what happened next?
We drafted a search warrant, requested a search warrant for 8374 Inverness to look for golf clubs.
And when was the search warrant executed?
February 13th, 2015.
So, long time after the original case, correct?
Almost a year.
Have you reviewed the photographs from the original search warrant of that residence?
Yes, I have.
I'm going to show you what I've marked as states 127 and 128. Do you recognize these exhibits
Yes, these are photographs from the garage.
from the original search warrant?
From the original search warrant, these are golf clubs that were located in the garage.
If there's no objection, I'd like to move 127 and 128 into evidence.
No objection. Need to clarify when these photos were taken.
You know the
Those are going
date
to be
of the
taken on
original
February
search warrant?
22nd, 2014.
Right, they'll be admitted without objection.
Oops. Pass it around. May I publish?
You may. And let me say to the jury, you don't need to memorize these things now. All these things will be with you during your deliberations. Take a quick look and you'll see them again later.
Go ahead and
permission to briefly approach.
What, do
I'll
what?
do it.
Okay.
And when you went back to the Frasch residence approximately a year after these photographs were taken, was the residence changed in any way from the photographs you observed from the original search warrant?
Yes, the residence was nearly empty.
And when you entered the residence, can you kind of just describe for us what you observed?
First, we had to go in through the garage, the side door on the garage, and when we entered there, those golf clubs in those photographs were no longer in that place. So we had to move some other things out of the way to get into the actual residence itself. And we actually did locate one golf club on the floor in the garage, and then as we cleared the rest of the residence and then conducted a search, we located one more leaning in a corner of the master bedroom.
I'm going to approach and show you what I've marked as States 120. Do you recognize States 120?
Yes, this is the golf club that was leaning in the corner of the bedroom.
All right, and is it a fair and accurate depiction of how the golf club appeared when you first saw it?
That's exactly how it is when I found it.
All right, Judge, at this time, I ask to move to evidence States 120
Any objection?
Object.
Be admitted?
and published.
You may.
So it's leaning up against the wall in an empty master bedroom.
Correct, and there was cobwebs connected to it somewhere along the way. I can't remember specifically where they were.
Did you review the original search warrant photographs, States Exhibit 127 and 128, to see if the club that you recovered during your search warrant was present in the golf bags in the garage back when the original search warrant was conducted?
I did, and I don't see, this was a Lucero, and I didn't see it in any of these pictures.
Did you review the photographs from the master bedroom that were taken at the time of the original search warrant to see if you could see this golf club in those photographs?
I did.
With what result?
I can't find it in those photographs either.
Okay, can you tell that it's not in those photographs?
That's tough to say with the amount of stuff that was in that room. The items in this corner in particular, the blinds, the statue that was in that corner as well, it was tough to say if it was there or not.
Let me make sure I understand. This picture we're looking at was taken in February 2015.
February 13th, 2015, yes, sir.
And when you reviewed the original search warrant photographs, I'm showing States Exhibit 20. Judge, may the witness use your pointer, please? If you can indicate to the jury where, in relation to this photograph, you found the golf club a year later.
It was in this corner right here.
Did you seize the item?
I did.
And do you have the item with you here today?
I have both of the golf clubs.
Okay, tell us about the other golf club that was seized that day.
The other one was a Sam Snead 3-wood that was located on the floor in the garage.
And you seized both of those golf clubs.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and this is States Exhibit 121. Do you recognize 121?
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize that exhibit?
This is going to be the 2 golf clubs that I placed in this box and sealed as evidence.
And does this exhibit appear to be in the same or substantially the same condition as when you seized the 2 golf clubs?
Yes, it does.
Judge, I would at this time move into evidence States 121.
Objection.
121 will be admitted without objection.
And publish?
Just want to show it to them, so it may,
Yes, sir.
all right?
Investigator Nealon, please open the exhibit.
Let me say to the jury, you see he's wearing a glove. That's not something special for this case. In all instances, when law enforcement handles items that may have blood on them, they'll wear a glove just for protection purposes.
This is the golf club that was located in the corner
In the bedroom?
of the bedroom. Yes, ma'am.
All right, and show us the one that was from the garage.
This one's gonna get stuck. This is the other one.
All right, good enough, thank you. So the one that was in the master bedroom is the one with the purple club head?
Yes, ma'am.
Besides locating the golf clubs that you've just shown us, did you do anything else to follow up on your conversation with Mr. Folsom?
I did. There was information in reference to some boats, vessels over in Panama City. I traveled to Panama City to verify initially that there was one and located a second one as well.
Okay, and did you locate a boat over in Panama City that could be classified as a cigarette boat?
It was a 30-foot fountain.
And is that a cigarette boat or no?
Yes, ma'am.
So the long skinny, it goes fast?
Long, skinny with twin engines, yes.
Okay. And was that boat seaworthy at the time that you went over there to check on it?
It would float, but the maintenance records that I reviewed, as well as the documents related to it, the engines had issues, wouldn't start, making noises, so I don't know that it would go very far at the time.
Okay. Anything else other than following up on the boat?
Not that I recall.
Funeral home?
Oh, yes. Yes, I did.
Funeral home, tell us about that.
The information in regards to, Mr. Folsom actually indicated it was going to be the medical examiner that told Mr. Frasch about the injuries to the head. I followed up with the funeral home, and that information, Mr. Frasch asked to see the body prior to any funeral and asked the individual specifically to feel the head at the back of her head, and spoke in reference to head trauma, which is where it was explained.
All right. Thank you. No further questions.
Crawford.
Thank you, Judge. Based on your initial conversation with this guy Folsom, that was recorded, right?
My first one was not, no, sir.
Okay. So the one that, well, let me back up then. When did you see him the first time?
January 6th. No, actually, January 5th, I met him, was the first time,
All
in
right.
2015.
And how long did that interview last?
I don't remember exactly how long it lasted.
And you came back the next day on the 6th with Weaver, is that right?
That's correct.
And that's when you got all this information from him?
I had most of it, the first interview, and once I realized or determined that this was actually valid information, I took Weaver back with me. Yes.
Well, how did you determine between January 5th and January 6th it was valid information?
The information related to the trauma that the victim received, the type of drowning, the cold water situation, just that they were in a room together, I determined that we needed to take him.
So then you came back with Weaver, and this conversation was in fact recorded.
Correct.
Is that right? And this is when he talks to you again about this Donzi.
Correct. At the time, it was a Donzi initially.
Okay.
Yes,
Matter of fact, he told you twice it was a Donzi, did he not?
he did.
Okay. And he was saying that Dr. Frasch told him it was a Donzi. That was his claim.
That is correct.
Okay. You go to Panama City,
I did.
and there is no Donzi
No, there was a fountain.
found. And this guy Folsom also told you that Dr. Frasch had told him he'd gone to check on the boat on the 22nd. Is that right?
He did.
And when you went to, how many marinas did you check in Panama?
Several. We ended up locating it at Pirates Cove,
Okay.
this particular boat.
And that's where this fountain was.
Correct.
Okay. Did you talk to personnel there and determine whether or not there's any evidence whatsoever that Dr. Frosch had been to that marina on the 22nd of February?
I did speak to the manager of the marina. He did not recall or have any documentation of anything specific for February 22nd. He did mention that Mr. Frasch would call frequently trying to get his boat fixed, and
This was going on for weeks and weeks,
for
isn't that right?
probably about 2 years.
2 years.
The boat had been there since 2012.
Okay. This boat had been sitting there for 2 years and the engine wouldn't run.
I don't know when the last time it ran.
Okay. You indicated that the plan was, we're going to release this dude, Folsom. Incidentally, you knew at the time he was telling you his story that he had 40 or more felony convictions, right?
I did.
I mean, he's well known to law enforcement, isn't he?
He is.
He's been a problem here for years. True?
He's also been a solution.
Okay. So you want to try to double check some things with this guy, right?
I did.
And so the plan was, we're going to release Folsom, we're going to get him out of jail. He's sitting in jail, we're going to get him out. And the plan was, then he'll get this call because he's claiming that Dr. Frosch is going to call him. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And so you release him and no phone call.
No phone call.
Right. And I think I heard you say that, well, the reason there wasn't a phone call was Dr. Frosch was in the medical unit?
He was moved to the medical unit almost, I believe, it was either the same day or the day after Mr. Folsom was released.
Okay. And it's not your testimony that you can't make phone calls from the medical unit, is it?
No,
Okay. As a matter of fact, Dr. Frosch was in that medical unit for what, 2 weeks?
I don't know specifically how long he was in there.
Do you know that there were 20 or 30 or more calls that he made while he was in the medical unit? Did you check that?
I don't recall.
Don't recall. So you're certainly not telling this jury that the reason Dr. Frosch didn't call Folsom to go get the club out of the house was because he couldn't make a phone call. You're not saying that, are you?
I'm not saying that that's why. No.
Okay. The fact of the matter is Folsom claimed he was going to get a call, and that's not true. He didn't get a call.
He did not get a call.
All right. So you go to the house with this search warrant, and you walk in, and lo and behold, everything's cleaned out. I mean, literally, that place was chaos when you went in on the first day.
I didn't go in on the first day.
When you saw
Yeah,
the photographs. Would that be a
yes.
fair statement? 549 photographs, stuff everywhere.
Correct.
All right. And do you know why and how the house got cleaned out?
Only through what I've heard that the family was cleaning it out.
Was there, did you know or did you all approve an auction house being able to come in and take all the property out for sale?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay. For the estate and what have you?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay. And you certainly didn't supervise any of that, is that right?
No, I didn't.
Okay. So when you come back in, it's your testimony that lo and behold, the club is sitting in plain view in that room against the wall.
That's where it was.
And that photograph you've shown us, you're claiming in that photograph, which the evidence will be before the jury, is the club was covered in cobwebs, is that right?
Not covered in cobwebs. There was just a few of them on the, between the wall and the shaft of the club.
All right. Well, the photograph will speak for itself, correct?
If you could see them there, I'd be surprised.
Did you ever make a statement in any kind of court proceeding or document that the club was found behind a curtain?
Not that I recall.
It's your testimony today that it wasn't behind any curtain,
It was found just like that photograph says.
just like the photo. Who went with you, Weaver?
Detective Weaver and Sergeant Tyson with the Sheriff's
When
Office.
you guys went into that house, were you able to determine whether or not there had been some sort of entry into the home not using a key to the door?
So you have the side door that goes to the exterior, comes into the garage, and then the door from the garage into what looks like the laundry room and then kind of into the kitchen. That door appeared to have been entered
Busted.
without a key.
Like a break-in?
Pried open, whatever.
Were you aware that there had been a report by the family of a break-in to the house 6 to 8 months earlier?
At the time, I was not. I am now, though, yes.
And that was investigated by law enforcement, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, from timeline then, we have a death on the 22nd of February 2014. Somewhere in between there's a break-in report. Then you've got Folsom's story on the 5th and 6th of January of 15. And we have you're serving the search warrant in February of 15. Or did I get, is it January 15?
Yeah, it was February 15th.
February 15. And in the interim, there's this, and before you can get in there with the warrant, when you do get in with the warrant, there's this golf club sitting there.
Correct.
And your entry under the search warrant was after the break into the house, is that right?
Yes.
You're aware that Mr. Folsom's been put back in jail since y'all got him out.
Yes, I am.
Did you or anybody from your office, that is the state attorney's office, go to bat for Mr. Folsom again to get him out of jail?
He worked on a totally separate case.
I'm sorry?
He's worked on a totally separate case.
Well, the question would be, did anybody go and put in a good word to get him out of jail?
It's a similar situation to this one.
He came up with some information on somebody else, so he gave a story to y'all, and man, he needs to get out of jail again.
This instance, it was on a correctional officer, so yes.
I see. Get in trouble, come up with a story, talk to the state, get out of jail. Correct?
It happens.
40-something times?
No.
You have a policy about when you decide not to use certain witnesses based on the number of times they've been convicted of felonies?
Not that I'm aware of.
Are you aware of any time you've had another felon come in here with 40-plus convictions and testify?
It's hard to say.
Have a moment, Judge?
Come on.
One moment. You indicated that you had a conversation with a funeral home director?
Yes,
Okay. And basically, that's your recollection of what he told you, is that right?
that's correct.
Okay. You weren't there at any time that Dr. Frasch was there examining and looking at his wife, is that right?
No, it was not.
Okay. So basically, what you've related to us is something you heard from the funeral director?
Correct.
Okay, thank you, that's all.
Redirect.
Investigator Newland, why does law enforcement keep going back to using Mr. Folsom?
He's proven reliable numerous times.
No further questions.
All right, any juror have a question for this witness? You can step down. Is Ms. Brown your next witness?
No, sir, but I would like a short recess to set up for the next witness.
All right, we'll take 10 minutes. Either side need anything?
No, sir.
Mr. Taylor,
I'm sorry?
you need anything?
Just have 1 second.
Yeah.
No, we're good, Judge.
All right, 10 minutes. All right, everybody be seated. You may call your next witness, Ms. Kappelman.
Dr. Flanagan?
Dr. Flanagan, you remain under oath.
Okay.
Please state your name.
Lisa Flanagan.
All right, Dr. Flanagan, we talked yesterday about the victim in this case having some injuries to the head, and we talked a little bit about what type of object might have caused that. There is a golf club with a purple club head in evidence now. Have you had an opportunity to see that golf club or photographs of it?
No, I have not seen the golf club.
I'll show you what's been introduced into evidence as State's Exhibit 121. It's the purple one.
Okay.
And ask you if you think that that purple golf club could have been responsible for the injuries that Mrs. Frasch received.
I don't think so. The pattern that she had was more diffuse, and a golf club with the force would be in one area, and I would expect to see either a laceration of the skin or a depressed skull fracture in that area. So, in my opinion, I can't say that it was caused by the golf club.
Okay, can you say that it definitely was not?
I can't absolutely exclude it totally, but I don't see any features that suggest that it was a golf club.
Okay. And in your opinion, are the injuries more consistent with a fist than a golf club being the instrument used to inflict them?
Yes.
And those are the injuries to the right side of her head where we saw the swelling around the eye, correct?
Yes.
There were a couple questions that I forgot to ask you yesterday that I want to ask you about the victim's autopsy. Did you note her height and weight in the autopsy?
Yes, she was 5'7" and a half, and I estimated her weight to be about 120 pounds.
Was toxicology ordered as part of the autopsy?
Yes, as part of the autopsy, I will collect the blood, urine, bile, vitreous, which is the fluid from the eye, and then that is submitted to a reference laboratory, and they do the toxicology testing.
Okay, what's the purpose of testing those substances?
Just to see what substances and drugs are present in the individual system, and actually it's under the law that which cases we have to do toxicology testing on.
Okay, and you did toxicology testing on this case, correct?
Yes, I did.
With what result?
The toxicology screen, it came back negative, other than an antibiotic that was in her system at trace level. Other than that, no drugs or alcohol were detected.
No alcohol at all?
None.
Even in the urine and or the vitreous?
All three of those were tested, the blood, urine, and vitreous, and there was no alcohol detected in any of those specimens.
What's the significance of there not being alcohol present in the urine versus the urine or the vitreous versus the blood?
Well, when someone consumes alcohol, they drink it, it goes in the stomach, and then it's absorbed into the blood. So that's the first place that it'll show up, would be in the blood. Then as the body metabolizes it and it moves around, it will start moving into the vitreous, so that will lag behind. So it'll be higher in the blood first, and then it'll be a little while later where it will go up into the vitreous. The body's trying to excrete it, so then once it's excreted through the kidneys, then it will show up in the urine. So the blood would show the levels first, but even when it is metabolized in the blood, we can still see it in the vitreous or urine for a period of time.
Are you familiar with the defendant's statements regarding his wife's alcohol consumption on the hours leading up to her death?
I understand it was said that she had consumed quite a bit of alcohol.
Right, and is that consistent or inconsistent with the toxicology findings in this case?
I don't see any evidence of the alcohol.
Okay, so his statements would be inconsistent?
Either she was not drinking it or she had metabolized it.
And in your opinion, could she have metabolized that quantity of alcohol between the time that he says she consumed it and the time of her death?
I'm not sure what time he said that she consumed it.
Starting at midnight and drinking up to 2 bottles of champagne at least through 4 a.m.?
I would, if she drank that much, I would expect to see it, at least in the vitreous or the urine.
No further questions.
Frasch?
You looked at that golf club, and from looking at it, plus everything else that the autopsy disclosed to you, it's your opinion that the golf club did not cause those injuries, is that correct?
It doesn't appear that it did. Like I described, it's a broader surface that struck her head. So on the golf club, I guess it was a driver or a wood, I don't see a flat enough surface that would impact a general area. Like I said, I would expect there to be a laceration or a depressed skull fracture.
Okay. Incidentally, yesterday you did, I think, mention on direct exam that it's pretty much protocol to examine or utilize what's called commonly referred to as a rape kit in your autopsy?
Yes.
Okay. And in conjunction with this case, was there any indication whatsoever from the examination through that kit that there had been any kind of forcible sex or rape in this case?
I did not see any injuries. For the rape kit, I will obtain the swabs, and that's sent to the laboratory, and they do the testing. I do not know what they found as far as semen or anything on the testing, but as far as the autopsy, there were no injuries.
So if there had been intercourse, it would be more consensual than anything else, is that right?
Or there were no injuries that resulted from it.
Okay, thank you.
Have you permitted to inquire into the new area raised by the defense?
Certainly, yeah, redirect.
The lack of injuries, does that exclude the possibility of a sexual assault?
No, just that there were no injuries that resulted from. the intercourse.
Are there always injuries if the sex is forced?
Not necessarily.
I think we're
All right. Any juror have a question on these topics? All right, you can step down. We want her to remain under the rule.
Yes, sir.
All right, remain under the rule, but she'll be on call, I assume.
Yes, sir.
All right, you may go about your business. We'll call you if needed. Call your next witness, please.
Sergeant Chris Corbett.
You face the clerk and be sworn, please, sir.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony given in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Have a seat. Slide up the microphone, please, sir.
Sir, please speak right into that microphone and tell us your name and spell your name.
Certainly I will. Good morning. My name is Sergeant Christopher Corbett, and that's C-O-R-B-I-T-T, and I'm a sergeant with the City of Tallahassee Police Department.
What are your duties at TPD?
Currently, I supervise the Technical Operations Unit, and that is the unit within the agency sort of responsible for all the high-tech ways that we may gather or analyze evidence. It includes things such as computer forensics, audio-video monitoring, surveillance, and what I spend most of my time doing, which is the analysis of communication records or cell phone records.
And do you have any specialized training and experience in the area of cell phone evidence and criminal investigations relating to cell phone evidence?
I do. I have well over, I think now, 1,100 hours of general technical training and just under 700 hours of training that deals more with cell phones and how cell phones operate and analysis of communication records and mapping of those records.
All right, have you testified as an expert in the area of cell phone evidence before?
Yes, I have.
How many times?
41 times.
All right, and do those include here in Leon County?
They do.
All right. Judge, at this time I would tender Sergeant Corbett as an expert in the area of cell phone evidence.
Do you wish for hire?
No, Board.
All right, you may proceed.
Were you asked to review cell phone information in reference to State of Florida versus Samra Frasch? I'm sorry,
Yes.
Adam Frasch.
Yes, I was.
Okay, and that included cell phone information for both Samra Frasch and Adam Frasch, correct?
That's correct.
All right, tell us what specifically you reviewed in preparation for your testimony.
I was provided with a number of sets of cell phone records. We're able to obtain records from various carriers that give us different pieces of information. But there were cell phone records for, I believe, 3 phones related to the Frosches and some other persons that were relevant to the investigation. Again, those call detail records contain things such as incoming, outgoing phone calls, text message logs. They do contain some location information, so we're able to make some approximations about where a handset might have been during a particular event. In addition to those records, I was provided with various business videos and other pieces of information that I was asked to compare to those records to see if they were consistent.
All right, and did you prepare a presentation to assist with your understanding of your testimony?
Yes, I did.
Okay, would it assist the jurors to be able to view your presentation throughout the course of your testimony?
I believe so.
All right, Judge, at this time, I would ask that he be permitted to publish a presentation in reference to his testimony.
All right, has it been marked for identification in some form? So we have-
I can present it. Is that what's on the disc you handed me?
No, that's video
Something else.
from, yes.
Okay, okay, thank you. I can provide a copy for the record, Judge, and we'll call it, 100A. But it's for
Okay.
demonstrative purposes.
Demonstrative aid,
Yes, sir.
okay? And in what form is something he's going to show on the computer?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you may proceed.
So Sergeant Corbett, the presentation that you're going to show the jury is a live presentation, correct?
Yes, it is.
So can you explain what that means and what impact that will have on the exhibit that we just talked about that could be made for the record purposes?
Certainly, I just want to make sure everything's signed in here.
Okay.
As I explained, we are able to get communication records from the carriers, and those communication records contain a lot of information for us that may be relevant to a case. And we have dates and times of events, whether a phone call is incoming or outgoing, a text message, the duration of that phone call, and we're usually provided with some location information. That would be a cell site that the handset was communicating with either at the beginning or end of a particular event. So we want to map those cell sites, and we want to know the cell sites that a handset was communicating with before we can sort of make those determinations about where it may have been, the approximate area it could have been in. So we use a mapping program, and it is the Leon County actual graphic information systems, their mapping program that is responsible for all the maps that happen here in Tallahassee, Property Appraiser and everything else. And that is a web-based application. It is a web-based map. And we're able to add things to that and add things to those presentations. But because it is web-based and live, we're able to zoom in and look at different features and turn things on and off. So it is sort of, again, a live presentation.
Okay, so the paper form of that presentation will be the equivalent of screenshots of the live presentation?
That's correct. Each presentation has sort of a PowerPoint feel to it, and as each screen progresses and we begin at a certain place, then that can be captured, and that was what we would be putting on paper.
All right, thank you. Please begin the
And
presentation.
maybe I should explain to the jury the significance of it being called demonstrative aid. Most of what we've provided to you, you will have with you during your deliberations. When it's a demonstrative aid, you will not be provided with that during your deliberations. You'll have the underlying evidence to the extent there is some, but a demonstrative aid does not go to the jury room. So you can ask for it, but you won't get it. All right. So anyway, you may proceed.
Thank you. Okay, so what is the first image that we're seeing here?
So this is just sort of an overview, just sort of our base map of the Leon County area. We do see just the title of the presentation here, the timeline of events. The events here will cross a time zone. Everything that is listed in the presentation is considered Eastern time, unless I specifically note that it's a different time zone. And one other nuance here of the records, talked about carriers are able to provide us various pieces of information. For Sprint in particular, when they give us text messages, their text messages are recorded in Central Time and their voice calls are in Eastern Time. So where we're talking about those records, I will reorganize those so that they are in the proper sequence. Again, we're just basically adding an hour to that Central Time zone to bring it to our Eastern. So that's what's noted here in the first slide. It's just sort of an intro.
Okay. And we'll start with February 21st, and if you could just kind of walk us through the timeline as evidenced by the materials you reviewed.
Certainly. So with the communication records, again, I'm asked to sort of look for certain events or see if it is consistent with different events, to see if particular phone calls are there that may be part of other testimony or whatever. So the first thing we look at here, this is a picture of the actual Sprint call detail records. It's a little hard to see at that distance, but basically we have the first few columns there are the phone numbers, and whether they're incoming or outgoing would depend on which column they're in. We get next an idea of whether it's an inbound or an outbound, or it could be routed, meaning it went to voicemail or it was routed to another geographic area. Then we see the start date and end date of those particular events. We're given a duration, that's in seconds, so we can tell how long it lasted. And then the next two columns are just some sort of location information for us. It gives us the switch or the general geographic area in the country that these cell sites are listed. And the last two columns are the ones that give us the actual cell sites that tell us which cell site the handset was communicating with for a particular event. So the first thing I was asked to evaluate is if there was a phone call between Mrs. Frasch and a phone number of 850-999-1910. And as we look into those records, hopefully you can see it from here, there is on the 21st of February 2014 at 6:11 p.m. there is an outgoing call in the records of Mrs. Frasch to the 850-999-1910, which has been identified as Mr. Gardner.
All right, so we're on February 21st, 2014, at 6:11 PM,
Yes,
a call from Mrs. Frasch to Mr. Gardner.
that's correct.
And are you able to tell the jury whether that call was answered, whether they talked?
I cannot. It's a 34-second call. And again, we're looking at Mrs. Frosch's record, so we see it as an outbound. To really know if it was received or not, we'd have to look at the other end of that. Regardless, it's a relatively short call at 34 seconds.
Okay, so it could have been answered but you can't say.
That's correct.
Okay. And what's the next event?
So the next event that I was aware of was a video from the Superlube or Auto Super Service Center located up Thomasville Road. There was a timestamp related with that is around 11:16 p.m. in the evening. And again, asked to compare if the cell phone records are basically consistent with Mr. or Mrs. Frosch being at that location at a particular time. So this is that video.
And Judge, at this time, I would ask to move into evidence State's Exhibit 100, which is a disc which contains this Superlube video.
Any objection?
No objection.
100 will be admitted. State's Exhibit 100.
Thank you, sir, and permission to publish through Mr. Corbett's presentation.
You may.
Please play the video. Why is it going to the blue screen if you know?
The original video has some where it goes blue screen.
I remember that.
I think your internet connection just got reset.
Did we back it up?
We did just a little bit, yes. We sort of got reset. And that's actually the end of the clip that we have.
And is there any cell phone activity that's consistent with the timestamp on this video? In other words, do you have any evidence to corroborate that the timestamp on the video is accurate?
Yes, again, the video is the piece of evidence that we use to compare to the records. Looking here, Mr. Frosch's Sprint records, we do see some events that are at 11:33 and 11:40, or 11:33 and 11:34 p.m. They're two outgoing phone calls, so they would have been placed shortly after the video time. And if we look at those on the map, we can see that they communicate with this cell site that's located here on Thomasville Road, and this is the location of the Super Service Center where that video was just taken. In the maps, the small little triangles here, these are the actual Sprint cell sites in our area. When we zoom out a little bit more, we can see them a little clearer. And then when we're talking about the cell sites or the particular sectors that a handset communicates with, they'll be emphasized with the larger arrows.
And when Mr. Frasch placed phone calls at 11:33 and 11:34 p.m. after the Superloop video, who was he calling?
That number, or those outgoing calls, was to 850-276-5667, which is Mrs. Frosch's phone, and 229-200-1415, which is another phone belonging to the Frosches.
Okay. And were either of those calls answered?
They were not.
All right, next slide.
So the next event we have that I was asked is another video, and around 11:50 p.m. that same evening, the 21st.
Okay, and that's been previously published, but we can watch it again in reference to the timeline. While we're watching this, could you tell us if there was any cell phone evidence to corroborate that the times on the gate were accurate?
Yes, there are.
And what are those?
In the next slide, we'll see there were additional communication events beginning around 11:48 p.m. that are communicating with cell sites that's consistent with their neighborhood or where this entry gate is in their residence. I'll show you those in just a second.
So it appears that Mr. Frasch is doing something on his cell phone in reference to the gate. Did you find anything to indicate what that might have been?
There was, again, we go back to the actual Sprint cell phone records. We do see a number of events that began around 11:48 p.m. They continued through 1:27 a.m. in this little segment of records. And we see one that is a incoming call around 11:53 from a 668-4187. And I don't know if we have confirmed that is the entry phone number for the residence or for that neighborhood, but it could be consistent with the event on his phone.
Okay.
And then there was, in this series of events, 1:26 a.m. is an outgoing call to 850-530-1286, which has been identified as Mrs. Carter.
Shakita Carter.
Yes,
So Mr. Frosch's phone was used to call Shakita Carter at 1:26 a.m.
that's correct.
And was that call origin or location of that call consistent with being in the Golden Eagle neighborhood or at the Inverness?
Yes,
Address?
all of those events that we just saw are communicating with one of these 3 cell sites, and they will toggle throughout the evening. But all of those cell sites would be consistent with serving the area of the residence or the entry gate or that very immediate neighborhood.
Are you able to tell whether that call to Shakita Carter was answered?
It is an 83-second phone call. We would have to again look at the other side of those records, the receiving records, to see if they indicate they were routed or not. The phone call itself is not really long enough to say for sure whether it was answered.
Could it have been a voicemail?
It could have been.
All right. And the next event?
So the next thing that I'm provided with is the information that Mr. Frasch was seen leaving the neighborhood at 8 o'clock in the morning. And the closest thing that we have, this is the morning of the 22nd. In the records, we have a phone call that begins at 8:13 a.m. It's a rather lengthy phone call. It's about 25 minutes. And that is to 850-321-5006, which is identified as Ms. Moore.
Martha Moore?
Yes.
Okay. So obviously it appears there was a conversation that took place on that
Yes.
call. And what can you tell us about the location of Mr. Frasch at the time of that call?
Again, from the records, we're provided with the cell site the handset was using usually at the beginning of the event and the end of the event. So we see for this rather lengthy call that it began on the cell site here on Thomasville Road, which would be consistent in time with leaving this neighborhood and traveling southbound. We see that that phone call terminates on a cell site here off of Capitol Circle Southeast. That would be consistent with another known piece, Pep Boys Auto.
Is the direction of travel throughout this phone call consistent with him traveling from Inverness to the Southwood neighborhood?
Yes,
Or
well,
toward that direction?
towards that direction. We begin up here and we terminate down here, so we would presume south travel, and Southwood is just a little bit below this, so kept going to reach Southwood.
Okay, and the next event?
So that, again, the video, just making sure that the known events are consistent with the records.
If you could go back to the Pep Boys video. Judge, at this time, I'd ask to introduce into evidence State's Exhibit 103, which is the Pep Boys surveillance video.
Any objection?
No objection.
I want to clarify, these videos, are they separate documents as well as being embedded in this demonstrative aid,
Are they separate documents?
or discs, separate discs?
Yes, I'm offering the videos as evidence. The publication is demonstrative through the presentation.
That was pretty circular. Do
I'm
we have
putting the
a disc?
videos into
Let me talk,
evidence.
then you can answer, okay? Do we have a disc by itself that shows the Pep Boys video that is marked State's Exhibit 103?
That's correct.
Okay, it'll be admitted.
Thank you. Permission to publish through the demonstrative.
You may.
And did you find any indication as to whether or not there was an issue with the Pep Boys timestamp?
Well, the video itself is time-stamped, I believe, as we see it play here at the top, has a timestamp of 8:30, I can see it myself, 8:35 or 8:36 a.m. The cell site records, or the phone records themselves, show that call terminates at 8:39, which will be a few minutes after the video time. So I'm not aware if the Pep Boys video surveillance system is to the minute accurate or not, but generally we're consistent with within a few minutes of that call termination and this video from Pep Boys.
Okay, and the next?
The next thing that we see in the records, incoming call, a couple of incoming calls here, and actually one incoming call and an outgoing call. The incoming call is from 229-200-1415, which we talked about previously, and that is another phone that belongs to the Frasches. And then an outgoing call to 850-212-2911. That is a phone identified as belonging to Mr. Lindsay.
I'm sorry,
Mr. Lindsay, Kendall Lindsay. So we have location information in Mr. Frosch's records for this outbound call that occurs at 9:04 a.m. And if we look at that on the map, we see that it's here. And that cell site is along I-10, about Mission Road, just a little south of the interstate there. And you can see the actual sector that handset is communicating with for that event.
So Mr. Frasch calls the phone that's identified on our cell phone exhibit. That phone is identified on that exhibit as just simply phone.
Yes.
So the phone identified to Mr. Frasch calls that phone during this time frame.
Actually, the other way around. The phone, or
Okay.
the phone identified as phone, calls into Mr. Frosch's phone.
Okay, and do we have an indication that those two cell phones were together at the time that that call was placed?
We do have the records for the phone identified simply as phone, and that is an AT&T phone. Their records appear kind of similar to the Sprint records we've been looking at. We get the same kind of basic information, incoming, outgoing calls. But instead of being given a numeric identifier for a cell site and then having to correlate that with a list, AT&T actually provides us the location information directly in the records. So we can see that they give us the latitude and longitude for the cell site and the orientation. So we're able to plot that on the map. And when we look at both of those events together, we can see that the 9:02 a.m. event from the AT&T records from the phone and the 9:04 a.m. event from Mr. Frosch's Sprint records. And we would say that those cell sites serve generally the same area, and it would be consistent with those handsets being together.
And that phone that we're identifying simply as phone ends in 1415. What can you tell us about that phone based on your review of the evidence in the case?
I mean, basically that it continues on to Panama City throughout the
Okay.
day.
All right, and can you tell us anything about the user of that phone?
In looking at some other evidence, that phone eventually was the subject of a forensic examination where the phone was actually examined. In looking at pictures and internet searches and things like that, it would appear that Mrs. Frosch would have been the primary user of that phone based on selfies and pictures of other things and different things in there. That would be a good guess.
But on this occasion, the phone traveled with Mr. Frasch to the Panama City area.
That's correct.
Okay.
So the next thing we have in the record is a series of events, both incoming and outgoing phone calls that communicate with a few different cell sites here. And we see one of the phone calls at 9:45 a.m. is an incoming phone call from 305-308-9380, which has been identified as Mr. Torres. And as we look at those on the map, we can see that those cell sites are generally consistent with travel west and then south toward the Panama City area.
Okay.
The next event that we have in the timeline is information that Mr. Gardner entered the Golden Eagle neighborhood at approximately 10:51 a.m. I believe that video has already been shown. And then at 11 a.m., there was a 911 call placed.
Okay.
The next event that I have in records is Mr. Frosch's phone, and we have two calls, both outbound calls. And as we look at those on the map, again, this is 11:28 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. It's again consistent with travel through Panama City towards Panama City Beach.
All right, thank you.
Another phone call at 11:34 a.m., which is an incoming phone call. As we look at that, communicates with a cell site here, even a little further west. Our previous cell site was over here.
All right,
That
so
would be,
continuing to evidence the travel to Panama City.
yes. And the next thing I was aware of was a video from the Wells Fargo Bank that is timestamped 10:46 a.m. Central, which would make it 11:46 a.m. Eastern. And while Panama City is in the Central Time Zone, our records are still in Eastern that we've been talking about.
Judge, at this time, I would ask to move into evidence States Exhibit 105, which is a disc containing only the Wells Fargo video, which I'm seeking to publish through the presentation.
No objection, Judge.
105 will be admitted.
May I publish?
You may.
what events occur after the Wells Fargo?
We have a series of events that begin at 12:27 p.m. and they run through just after 1, and they begin to communicate with one particular cell site and sector. We see that on the map. That is the cell site here. Our previous one was this same cell site but a different sector. Our bank was right over here, and these begin to communicate, which is consistent with the Nancy Drive address.
All right, and these are all Mr. Frosch's, the activity associated with the phone on our exhibit that's associated with Mr. Frasch.
That's correct.
So that's the only phone we're looking at right now,
Correct.
okay? All right, and at some point, were you asked to isolate the cell phone activity between Mr. Lindsay, Mr. Frasch, and Mrs. Frasch on February 22nd?
Yes, I was.
And could you summarize what you found in reference to that?
Sure. These are Mr. Frosch's Sprint records, and they have been reduced down to just the calls that are between Mr. Frasch and Mr. Lindsay. And Mrs. Frasch, with an addition of one other phone number, I'll talk about in a second. But they show us, again, a number of incoming and outgoing events between those two handsets and the other two that we mentioned throughout the day of February 22nd.
And Mr. Lindsay testified that he made contact with someone associated with law enforcement and then called
Whoever's got a phone on, turn it off, please. Step out. Out.
Mr. Lindsay testified that he had contact with someone associated with law enforcement and then contacted Mr. Frasch. Can you shed any light on those events based on, or can you corroborate that based on the cell phone evidence that you viewed?
The phone number 850-443-8499 has been identified to me as a former law enforcement officer who may have had information. We do see that there is an incoming call from that number to Mr. Lindsay, and then there are subsequent calls from Mr. Lindsay to Mr. Frasch.
Okay, and did Mr. Frasch, you mentioned that we were isolating calls including Mrs. Frasch that day. Did Mrs. Frasch have any active activity on her phone, meaning did she, on February 22nd, is there any evidence that she did anything on her phone or had any activity that she would have been required to manipulate the phone in any way?
No, there's not.
When was the last time that you can say, based on what you reviewed, that Mrs. Frasch did anything active on her phone?
The active phone calls end at just after 6 p.m. on the evening of the 21st. There may be some internet activity, some passive internet activity that continues through a little later in the evening, but not much. So most of that activity ends the early evening hours of the 21st.
And is there an indication that her phone may have been powered down after that?
There are indications of that, yes.
And what are those indications?
There are no location information in her records that are for her handset. So incoming calls that show location for her phone, they're actually for the phone that's calling in. So usually if a phone call is answered or received or there's any event, then we would see that location information just as we had here. I was also told that calling into the phone that morning, the call went directly to voicemail. It did not ring, but it went directly to voicemail. That's another indication that the network is aware that it's not able to reach the phone and doesn't attempt to, and sends the call directly to voicemail. So those are kind of indicators for us that the phone may have been powered down.
So tell us one more time, when was the last active event that her phone had?
It's 6 something in the evening. It's coming up in a couple of slides.
Okay, on
Which-
February
The 21st,
21st,
yes.
2014. All right, and on this slide, you have several voicemails listed. Can you tell us about those?
Yes, I was provided with 4 voicemails that were left for Mrs. Frasch by Mr. Frasch the morning and afternoon hours of February 22nd.
Okay, and could you walk us through those voicemails?
Sure. The first one that I have is at 11:30 a.m.
All right, and where would Mr. Frasch have been at that time based on his cell phone location?
Based on his cell phone location, he would have been in Panama City.
All right. And was this voicemail before or after the call from Kendall Lindsay to Mr. Frasch that occurred right after the law enforcement call?
This would have been before.
Before, okay. Judge, at this time, I would seek to introduce State's Exhibit 104, which contains a disc of the voicemails that Mr. Frasch left Mrs. Frasch on February 22nd, 2014.
Any objection? State's Exhibit 104 will be admitted without objection.
And may I publish through the presentation?
Good night.
All right, please play the voicemail that was left at 11:30 a.m.
Since I'm not having Jay come over and help you with the one that tell me that we're gonna make it up, start visual and that, and all the ones and some of you stuff, but, these babies will have her, but, it'll make it good, get things squared away, and I'll say, tell me what you want to do, don't come over here.
What happens if you reduce the volume?
By yourself, let me know, but I love you, well, look out, Stacy, I love you.
Judge, what happens if we turn our volume down and you turn yours up? Does that help?
Let's try that.
Okay, since I'm not having Jay come over and help you with cleaning up and that, but tell me, when we're gonna make it up, start visual and that, and all the ones and some of you stuff, but, these babies will hurt, but, it'll make it good, get things squared away, and I'll say, tell me what you want to do, don't come over here. You know, it's obvious you can call yourself, let me know, but I love you, so I'll be looking out there, I love you, bye.
All right, and what time was the next voicemail?
The next voicemail was 12:54 p.m.
Judge, can we ask him to speak into the microphone a little bit better?
Sorry. The next was at 12:54 p.m.
All right, and that would be still before the Kendall Lindsay call with law enforcement?
That is correct.
Okay, let's publish that one, please. And let's turn the volume way down on yours, please.
Sir, that will charge your phone. I'm trying to get ahold of you, see what you're gonna do today, it's not a future. What you plan on doing, and Joe's is working, but also, it's what you're involved. Obviously, you take care of girls, speech, because that will, this call will come, so what you can do, like, the woman goes on the way, if you just want to get one, upset, okay? I love you.
Okay,
I don't know if they would be better through the computer itself and not through the system here, if you want to try that.
okay.
I think that we're okay.
Okay, all right.
Does the jury need to hear it again? If you do, raise your hand. All right, try it.
Try it
You
again.
want to try it? How do you want to do it?
I'll try it out of the computer here and see if that's any better.
Sam, charge your phone.
I don't think that's better.
Okay.
Worse.
That's what-
Okay, we'll figure out a way to fix that. All right, what about the last voicemail that was left?
There was.
Oh, there's two more, correct?
There's a voicemail of 4.
Put your volume up just a little bit more than what you've been doing, and I'm gonna cut this down just a little bit, so we maybe split the difference.
All right, sir.
All
try
right,
that
and what time is this next voicemail
This
left?
is at 4:43 p.m.
And these are all Eastern Standard Times, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And again, we still haven't had the Kendall Lindsay call to law enforcement or with law enforcement?
We have.
Okay, so this is after that?
Yes, we have the 4:31 p.m. is the call to that phone number that we just talked about as being identified as a previous law enforcement. And then we
Tell me
also
one more
have
time the time?
at 4:31 p.m.
4:31, okay.
And then we have a call at 4:38 p.m. where Mr. Lindsay actually calls the Leon County Sheriff's Department. So we have 2 contacts there with what may be a law enforcement source. The voicemail we're just now talking about is at 4:43 p.m., which is just about 5 minutes later.
Okay, and has Lindsay called Frasch yet at this point?
We do have some calls back and forth, and I can drop back to the records and actually see those.
Does it appear they've connected at the time that this voicemail is left is really my question.
At the time this voicemail has left, I would say yes, Mr. Frasch does an outbound call to Mr. Lindsay. It's 102 seconds, right around 102 seconds. I think that they would have spoken, could have spoken.
Okay. All right, so let's hear the 4:43 voicemail.
Sam, please turn on your phone. You'll know where you're at, what you're doing, and doing. Very upset, so you know, moving on. Okay, I love you.
All right. And is there an additional voicemail at 4:47 p.m.?
Yes, there is.
Let's attempt to publish that one.
Emma, please turn on your phone and call me as soon as you get this message, turn on the phone. Sorry, very much, but yeah, please call it back. But waiting for it, okay, beat the level, the call was message that much.
Okay, thank you. And the next slides, I think, further, I guess I jumped ahead a little bit on you. So these illustrate the victim's lack of activity, some of these slides.
Yes, they will.
All right, well, tell us about what you have prepared next.
So the next thing that I was asked to look at was activity within the handset itself. Again, I mentioned that forensic exams were done of phones. So things such as internet browsing history and text message content and those kind of things we may be able to get. Generally from the carriers, we're not able to get the content of communications. Most do not retain it. So if we want to know what the subject of a text message was, what was actually said, then if we're able to do an actual forensic exam of the handset, we may be able to see that. And in this case, they were able to obtain some text message content and some web history that appeared relevant.
From which phone?
From the phone of Mrs. Frasch, the Sprint phone of Mrs. Frasch.
All right, and what content was relevant on the cell phone of Mrs. Frasch?
There was some SMS messages that were the evening of February 20th of 2014 into February 21st. And from that phone, the phone number that was associated was a 334-435-0762, and it's indicated in her phone as Erica Husband.
So she inputted the number as Erica Husband.
That's correct.
And when you say SMS activity, is that the same as text messaging?
It is, short message service or text message, yes.
Okay. And this is the content of the text messaging?
Yes.
All right, and are these from Mrs. Frasch?
They are
Or
both
handset?
inbound and outbound, so they're communications from Mrs. Frasch to this number identified as Erica's husband. There's some inbound from that, and then there's also a text message received from Mr. Frosch's number into Mrs. Frosch's number. And that's
All
the Miss Carter's phone number.
Okay, so the first entry, go back to that one, please. Hi, this is my email, samrafrosch@hotmail.com. Is this, that's an outgoing one from her to who she identified as Erica Husband?
That's correct.
All right, and then is the Shakita Carter with the phone number, is that
from the husband to her or from her to the husband?
That is from Mr. Frosch's phone to her phone. And we can see here
I see.
from,
Okay, so this one comes from Mr. Frosch's phone to her phone.
Correct.
And we don't know whether those two phones were together when the text message was sent, do we?
we do not.
All right, and then the next entry there, thanks and please check your Facebook. Who is that one from?
That would be from the contact that she has identified as Erica husband.
Okay. And then the last entry, I'm send you now from Adam his phone, Erica voice tape, and have 3 with it, let know B if you have it. Who is that from?
That is from Mrs. Frosch's phone to the phone number identified as Erica's husband.
Okay. And does she send the Erica's voice tape, 3 voice messages? Do we know that?
I do not know that.
Okay. And what do you have next?
The records themselves, and looking back at the Sprint records to make sure that the events that are in the phone were actually on the network, we do see that we have the calls, both voice calls and some text messaging from the 334 number that's identified in her contacts as Erica husband. And we do see the text message from Mr. Frosch's phone coming in that are times are consistent with what was in the phone.
All right, and tell us those times again. You said it was between February 20th and February 21st of 14?
Yes, the first one corrected from the times within the phone are not adjusted for the time zone that we're in. It tells us that it says UTC +0, it's coordinated universal time that's associated with GMT, so we have to do an offset. At that time, it's -5 hours, so we subtract the hours from that, and we have the correct time here. So the first one's at 8:31 p.m. on the evening of the 20th, 9:07 p.m. on the 20th, then 6:34 a.m. on the 21st, and 3:24 p.m. on the 21st.
What was the last one?
3:24 p.m.
Okay. Any other content that you discovered that would be relevant?
The other things that were identified to me as being relevant were searches related to an Erica Tidwell. We do see that there were a number of events here, and again, it's listed in the phone as February 21st of 2014, and they begin probably 7 o'clock in the morning, 7:03, if we do the -5 hour deduction here. So for the next several minutes, and those include things such as people search for Ms. Tidwell, Facebook profiles, Spokio, LinkedIn, Pinterest, YouTube, just various web activity associated with Ms. Tidwell's name.
And all of this searching was done on Samra Frosch's phone?
That's correct.
At approximately what time on 2/21/14?
We see here the first event in this is at 12:03 p.m. without the correction, so it'll be 7:03 a.m.
Okay. And then it continues through when's the last event?
The last event associated with her name is at 7:09 a.m.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
The other thing that I was asked to look at was activity on Mrs. Frosch's phone, the Sprint phone that was related to her. We see that there were, and to accurately answer the question I was asked just a little bit ago, the time of the last call, that is for her phone, the last active event is an outbound call on the 21st that begins at 6:16 p.m. and ends at 6:20 p.m. So that's the evening of the 21st. Every event that is associated with the phone and those records since that time are passive or inbound events. They're incoming text messages or incoming voice calls. And we see a series of those. They begin at approximately 9:44 a.m. in the morning. We can sort of zoom in here a little bit more, and hopefully we can see it. So we see the indication from Sprint, routed call, routed call, routed call, routed call. That tells us that that phone was routed, presumably to voicemail, as we do have a voicemail indicator there. Then we have inbound, that is a text message. The two more inbounds are notifications to the phone of voicemails, but they are inbound events and nothing that's active or would seem to require manipulation of the handset.
Nothing after 6:20 PM on 2/21/14.
That's correct.
After the calls between Kendall Lindsay and Adam Frasch on 2/22/14 that we discussed, is there any indication, based on what you reviewed, that Mr. Frasch then called law enforcement?
I did not see any events that appeared to be Mr. Frasch contacting law enforcement.
No further questions.
Cross, are you gonna wanna refer to these, Mr. Taylor? No.
One moment.
We're about due for a break. Let's take a break here. We'll take 10 minutes.